them a kindly welcome. Please raise the roof for Mayor Pete Buttigieg.
All right. Whoa. Look at that. Hi. God. Well, you get up here, it looks like an awful lot of people in this room. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Congresswoman Custer, for the work that you were doing on Capitol Hill and for representing us so well. Wouldn't we be a better place if we had more members of Congress like what you have right here? Well, help is on the way. And thanks so much, Senator, and everybody who's part of this. I know I'm here as part of the 2020 process, but I want to begin, since this is 2019, by mentioning the importance of the local elections coming up and then the state elections that will happen in the even year too, because we've got to stop treating the presidency like it's the only office that matters. So I'll be here to do my part on that front too. But I'm also thankful to be here where I'm gathering the rules of the road in New Hampshire is in order for people to know what you stand for, first they got to see you stand on something. We've done park benches, platforms, and we got a pretty sturdy chair here that I trust is good New England furniture, so I think it's going to stand me well. Let me share just a little bit about what we're up to, and then a little bit about why. First of all, I recognize that it is perhaps a little bit less than traditional to have a 30-something Midwestern mayor entering into a conversation about the highest office in the land. I get that. And I get the audacity of someone like me trying to do something like this. But I also believe we are at a moment that calls for greater change than we have seen in a long time. That even now, we might be underreacting to the kind of social, economic, and political change that our country is going through. I believe that we're not just experiencing a change in an election, we're experiencing the beginning of a new era, and nobody knows yet what that era is going to look like. That this election is going to decide what not just the next 4, but the next 40 years are going to bring. And so we've got to make sure that we're approaching it with an eye on the future. That's why I frequently talk about America as it will look in 2054, because that's the year, God willing, that I will reach the current age of the current president. And it's always fun watching that sink in. And that means a lot of these questions about the future are not theoretical for me. Matter of fact, nothing about politics is theoretical for me. Healthcare is not theoretical for me when my mother-in-law depends on insurance that she buys through the Affordable Care Act for chemotherapy that her life depends on. Foreign policy is not theoretical for me when I still have in my desk drawer a letter that I put into an envelope there and wrote just in case on the outside of, knowing that folks could find it there if they needed to, if I did not come back from my deployment to Afghanistan. Politics became very personal for me the last few months as we went through some of the toughest times in my family's life. The last months of my father's struggle with cancer, when I at one point had to go find him in the middle of a chemotherapy treatment to let him know that my mother was going to need open heart surgery. Not the kind of thing you put in a text message, right? And by the way, Mom's fine, just so you know. But I had a couple of things going for me that morning as I got into the car to go from the hospital to go find Dad. One of them was my husband, who was at my mother's bedside, which was the most natural place in the world for him to be because the hospital knew that in the eyes of the law, as well in the eyes of our family, he and I were married and we were family. That marriage of ours that exists by the grace of a single vote on the U.S. Supreme Court is a daily reminder, every time I get up in the morning and every time I go to bed, about how politics affects us in our everyday lives. And the other thing we had going for us was Medicare. The fact that people in power, people in Congress, people made a decision that when you reach a certain point in your life, you shouldn't have to worry about whether you can pay for health care coverage. And so as agonizing as some of the decisions we had to make as a family were, we only had to make them on one basis, and that was what was medically right for our family. Not, can we pay for any of this? And that's why I want every American to have that same kind of freedom and that same kind of coverage. Tip O'Neill said all politics is local, but all politics is personal. And that's why we're doing this, and that's why I'm bringing my admittedly unorthodox story into this picture. Coming from a community that is so much one that rhymes in its story with rural communities, other industrial communities like mine, and even neighborhoods in big cities that all have this one thing in common. And it's that young people grow up getting the message that the only way you can succeed is to get out. I found purpose, and I tell this story in a book which I believe is probably available at this bookshop, by the way, in case you're inclined to. That's sort of how we're paying off the wedding, so thanks if you picked it up. But I wrote that book to share the story about how I found purpose right at home. And our city's story, one that started this decade on a list of dying communities and is now growing in jobs and population at a clip we haven't seen in my lifetime. The reason that's so important is that we need to tell a different story than the one that's being sold out of the White House, which would have you believe that the only way to speak to communities like yours and like mine is through resentment. That the only way we can be better off is to stop the clock and turn it back. That's just not true. And we know that there is no such thing as an honest politics that revolves around the word again. These changes are going to happen with or without us. The only question is whether we will rise to meet those changes. And if this isn't a country that rises in the face of change, masters those changes, and use them to make us better off in our everyday life, then I wouldn't know what America was. That's who we are. And that's what we have to be about going forward. So I'm proud to represent a community that is not the biggest city in this country, but that reflects that same style and that same way of living that this president has so cynically targeted. I'm also proud of the fact that I'm a mayor. I think we'd be well served if Washington started looking a little more like our best run cities and towns instead of the other way around. And even though some people are asking whether my age is a liability, I am proud to represent a new generation in American leadership team. After all, we're the generation that has the most at stake. Our generation is going to be on the business end of climate change for the next 50 years. Our generation, by the way, provided most of the troops in the conflicts after 9/11. And yet, our generation stands to be the first in American history to be worse off economically than our parents if we don't do something to change that. So let's do something to change that. And I see in the audiences that I speak to across the country the makings of a generational alliance. Not generational conflict, not what was experienced in the 60s of young people versus their parents, but an alliance around the idea that we ought to have a better future and that everybody cares about that future, no matter your age. Now, coming from a different background also means I believe we ought to have a different vocabulary as Democrats. Not different values, but maybe a new vocabulary to explain the values that make us who we are. Because, look, we're Democrats, right? We talk in terms of policies. I'm a policy guy, and you need to know where each of us stands on the policy questions of the day. But maybe we would be well served not to go right into the 14-point plan and the PowerPoint deck before we've explained why. And my idea of how we explain why is very simple. It's 3 words: freedom, democracy, and security. So if anybody tells you Democrats can't put what we believe onto a bumper sticker, tell them freedom, security, democracy. And here's why. First of all, freedom is something that our conservative friends have monopolized, and I can think of no better place than the state that says live free or die to remind one another and ourselves that freedom doesn't belong to one political party. Especially when that political party has just experienced a hostile takeover by a president with authoritarian tendencies. I would argue that you're not free if you're unable to start a small business because you're afraid leaving your job means losing your health care. I would argue that you're not free if your reproductive health is dictated by a male politician or boss. Or if you're teaching our children and you're not free to do your job because the only way anybody can gauge you is by a number on a standardized test. And needless to say, in my personal life, you're most certainly not free if a county clerk gets to tell you who you ought to marry. So let's think about freedom in its richest sense. Not just freedom from government, freedom from taxes, but freedom to live a life of your choosing, which only happens if we have good government. Good government that secures freedom just as much as bad government of any size infringes on that freedom. Let's go out there and remind everybody how freedom works. And while we're at it, let's talk about security. Because I am sick and tired of the idea that security, or patriotism, belongs to one side of the aisle. Especially right now. We're the ones who know there's a lot more to security than putting up a wall from sea to shining sea. We know that security includes cybersecurity, which I'm not sure a lot of the people in charge right now even understand. Security in the face of a rising tide of global, violent, white nationalism.
Yes, thank you.
If you can't name it, you can't fight it. And, by the way, let's talk about what might be the great security issue of our time, climate change. I had to fire up the Emergency Operations Center of our city twice in 2 years. And the first time was a 1,000-year flood, and the second time was a 500-year flood. So either I got to go start playing the odds, because I got amazing luck, or something is changing around us. And we're not even having a contest between whose climate plan is better, because the other side can't bring itself to admit that this is even real. So let's call climate what it is, climate security, a life and death issue for our generation. But if we want to defend our freedom and ensure our security, then we've got to make sure we have the right kind of democracy. Democracy shouldn't be a dirty word. Our democratic republic is an elegant system, but lately it hasn't been quite democratic enough. It's not democratic enough if legitimate voters are denied the opportunity to vote because one side thinks as a matter of political strategy that they're better off if fewer people are able to vote. I don't think we're as democratic as we ought to be if dollars can outvote people. And if the only way to fix that is a constitutional amendment, then isn't that what the amendment process is for? If we really want to call ourselves a democratic republic, maybe we ought to do away with a system where districts are drawn such that politicians get to choose their voters instead of the other way around. We know what we have to do. And with this new vocabulary, I think we can reach people who, for any number of reasons, may have stopped listening to what we have to say. But we have to actually get that out there and do it. We have to do it in communities of every stripe, of every size, red and blue, because where is it written that a so-called red state or red county has to be red forever? They didn't start out Republican. They don't have to be Republican in the future. But we got to get out there and talk to them. And that's what this process is all about for us. I know that these are challenging times, but the Congresswoman had it right. Spring is here. And as grim as it might be, as hard as it is to take our eye off what we see on cable, because grotesque things have the quality of drawing your eye, and we can't take our eye off that show. But the show is not what matters. What matters is our everyday life. And our everyday life is subject to the decisions that are being made by people with power over our life, and that's what elections are all about. So we've got to change the channel. And that's what we're about. I'll leave you with this. I know it's getting pretty warm in here. I believe running for office is an act of faith and it's an act of hope. And so is helping somebody run for office. So even though I'm starting to feel really encouraged by the fact that a month ago I was just trying to get people to say my name, and now we seem to have attracted a little bit of attention, we know that this is just the outset of a process, an engagement, a dialogue with the voters of this state and the other states in this process. And in order to get anywhere, I'm going to need help. If you believe in this message, I'm going to need you to tell some friends. I'm going to need you to help spread that word. Not just that I belong at the table. I think we got that far. But that this is the way that we can begin to win not just an election, but an era. So, can I count on you for some help? Yes! Then I'm feeling pretty good about the future. Thank you!